My name is Jessica, and at 25 years old, I never imagined that the people who raised me would steal the most precious symbol of my future and sell it to fund my brother's bachelor party in Las Vegas. The moment I discovered my $18,000 engagement ring was gone from my childhood bedroom, replaced by a crude handwritten IOU, I realized that blood doesn't always mean family, and sometimes the people who should protect you are the very ones you need protection from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, I learned early that in the Martinez household, my younger brother Carlos could do no wrong while I was expected to be responsible, reliable, and invisible when convenient. My parents, Maria and Roberto, immigrated from Mexico when they were teenagers, working multiple jobs to build what they considered the American dream. They owned a small auto repair shop that provided a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, but their old-world values meant that sons were treasured while daughters were preparation for someone else's family. From childhood, the differences in how Carlos and I were treated were stark and undeniable. When he broke windows playing baseball, it was boys being boys. When I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet, it became a lecture about being more careful and respectful of our home. His Little League games were family events with my parents cheering from the bleachers, while my debate team competitions were schedule conflicts they rarely managed to attend. The financial disparity was even more obvious. Carlos received a car for his 16th birthday, a used but reliable Honda that my father spent weeks restoring in the shop. For my 16th birthday, I received a cake and a promise that I could borrow the family car when it wasn't needed, which wasn't often considering Carlos had claimed it as his personal vehicle. When it came time for college, my parents established a fund for Carlos's education, discussing his future career options and which universities might accept him despite his mediocre grades. My academic success, including a full scholarship to Arizona State University, was acknowledged with a brief "That's good, Mia," before the conversation returned to Carlos's needs. I majored in accounting, drawn to the precision and logic of numbers in a world where family dynamics defied reason. Working part-time at a tax preparation firm while maintaining my scholarship requirements, I developed a reputation for thoroughness and reliability that would serve me well throughout my career. My professors respected my work ethic, and my employers valued my attention to detail, creating the foundation for professional success that my family seemed to take for granted rather than celebrate. During my junior year, I met David Chen at a campus coffee shop where I was studying for my advanced taxation midterm. He was a computer science major, quietly working on code at a corner table, and something about his focused concentration reminded me of my own approach to challenging problems. When my laptop battery died and I groaned in frustration, he offered to share his table and power outlet without expecting anything in return. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. David appreciated my drive and ambition, never suggesting that I should diminish my goals to accommodate his. He came from a family that valued education and hard work, where both sons and daughters were encouraged to pursue their dreams without gender-based limitations. The contrast between his supportive family dynamics and my own was both refreshing and occasionally painful, highlighting just how differently I had been raised. David's parents, Helen and James Chen, welcomed me warmly from our first meeting, asking thoughtful questions about my studies and career aspirations. They remembered details about my internships and celebrated my academic achievements with genuine enthusiasm. During holiday gatherings, I was included in conversations and decision-making, treated as an equal rather than a guest who should be grateful for acceptance. The experience of being valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide for others, was transformative and healing. After graduation, I accepted a position with Morrison & Associates, a respected accounting firm in Scottsdale, while David joined a technology startup that specialized in cybersecurity solutions. We moved in together after 6 months, splitting expenses equally and building a life based on partnership rather than traditional roles. Our relationship flourished in an environment of mutual support and shared responsibilities, creating the foundation for a future that excited both of us. 2 years into our relationship, David began hinting about marriage, discussing our long-term goals and what kind of life we wanted to build together. These conversations felt natural rather than pressured, emerging from our deepening connection and shared vision of the future. He met with my parents formally to ask for their blessing, following traditional customs that he hoped would demonstrate his respect for my family and heritage. My parents' reaction to David's request was lukewarm at best. They acknowledged his stability and education, but seemed disappointed that I wasn't marrying within our culture. Their concerns focused more on what the extended family would think rather than my happiness or compatibility with my chosen partner. When I expressed frustration about their lack of enthusiasm, my mother reminded me that marriage was about more than personal feelings and that I should consider how my choices affected the entire family's reputation. Despite their reservations, David proceeded with his proposal plans, spending months researching jewelers and learning about diamonds to ensure he selected something truly special. He wanted the ring to represent not just our love but his understanding of my taste and style. After consulting with several gemologists and visiting numerous jewelry stores, he chose a stunning 2-carat princess-cut diamond set in platinum with smaller diamonds along the band, a design that balanced elegance with timeless beauty. The proposal itself was perfect in its simplicity and personal meaning. During a weekend hiking trip to Sedona, at the same trail where we had shared our first serious conversation about the future, David got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. The ring was more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined wearing, catching the desert sunlight and throwing rainbows across the red rocks surrounding us. Through tears of joy, I said yes, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world to have found someone who loved and respected me completely. The ring quickly became more than jewelry to me. It represented security, partnership, and a future where I would be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide for others. When I looked at it throughout the day, I was reminded that someone had chosen me, not out of obligation or convenience, but because they genuinely wanted to build a life with me. The weight of it on my finger was comforting and grounding, a physical reminder of love that wasn't conditional or comparative. David had insisted on comprehensive insurance for the ring, understanding both its monetary value and its irreplaceable emotional significance. We spent an afternoon with his insurance agent, documenting every detail of the ring, including professional photographs and a detailed appraisal from the jeweler. The policy covered theft, loss, and damage, providing peace of mind that our investment was protected. At the time, this seemed like simple prudence rather than prophetic preparation for betrayal. My parents' reaction to the engagement was mixed, dominated by concerns about wedding costs and expectations rather than celebration of our happiness. My mother immediately began discussing guest lists and venue requirements, focusing on how our wedding would reflect on the family, rather than what David and I actually wanted for our special day. My father worried about his financial obligations, despite our repeated assurances that we planned to pay for our own celebration. Carlos, now 23 and working sporadically in construction when he felt motivated, seemed indifferent to my engagement news. He was more interested in his own social life and the various get-rich-quick schemes that occupied his attention than his sister's milestone moments. His girlfriends came and went with increasing frequency, each relationship ending in drama that somehow required family intervention and financial support to resolve. The pattern of family dynamics remained unchanged despite my engagement and professional success. Carlos continued to be the primary focus of my parents' attention and resources, while my achievements were acknowledged briefly before conversation returned to his latest crisis or opportunity. When I received a promotion at work that came with a significant salary increase, the news was overshadowed by Carlos's announcement that he was considering starting his own landscaping business and would need startup capital. Planning the wedding became an exercise in diplomacy and compromise, balancing David's family's inclusive approach with my parents' focus on appearances and traditions. Helen Chen offered to help with any aspects of the planning, approaching each decision with enthusiasm and genuine interest in our preferences. My mother, meanwhile, seemed more concerned with what other families would think of our choices than whether they reflected our personalities and values. The guest list negotiations were particularly challenging, with my parents insisting on inviting distant relatives and family friends who barely knew David and me, while expressing resistance to some of David's closest friends because they weren't Hispanic. These conversations revealed the extent to which my parents viewed the wedding as a family obligation rather than a celebration of our love and commitment to each other. 6 months before our planned wedding date, Carlos announced that his longtime friend Miguel was getting married and had asked him to be the best man. The bachelor party was planned for Las Vegas, a 4-day extravaganza that Miguel's other friends had organized as a send-off to single life. Carlos was excited about the trip, but complained constantly about the expense, mentioning repeatedly how much money he would need for flights, hotels, meals, and entertainment in a city designed to separate tourists from their cash. The financial pressure of the bachelor party became a constant theme in family conversations, with Carlos lamenting that he couldn't afford to participate properly in his best friend's celebration. My parents began discussing ways to help him fund the trip, treating it as a crisis that required immediate family intervention. When I suggested that Carlos could work extra hours or ask for overtime shifts to earn the money he needed, my parents dismissed this as unrealistic given his other commitments and responsibilities. The irony wasn't lost on me that Carlos's financial emergency received more family attention and concern than my upcoming wedding or professional accomplishments. While David and I were paying for our own celebration and managing our own expenses, Carlos was being treated as though his participation in someone else's bachelor party was a family obligation that everyone should sacrifice to support. During family dinners, the conversation invariably turned to Carlos's Vegas plans and the mounting costs associated with being a proper groomsman and best man. My parents worried aloud about disappointing Miguel's family if Carlos couldn't participate fully in the festivities, as though their reputation was somehow tied to their son's ability to keep up with his friends' expensive lifestyle choices. I began to feel increasingly frustrated by the disparity in how my parents approached financial decisions related to their children. My responsible financial management and independence were taken for granted, while Carlos's poor planning and unrealistic expectations were treated as problems that required family solutions. The message was clear that being reliable meant being invisible, while being irresponsible meant being prioritized. 3 months before the wedding, during a particularly tense family dinner, my father announced that they were struggling to come up with the money for Carlos's Vegas trip without compromising their own financial stability. The auto shop had been slower than usual, and they had already dipped into their savings to help Carlos with previous financial emergencies. The stress of the situation was affecting their sleep and their relationship, adding tension to household interactions. My mother suggested that perhaps Carlos could skip some of the more expensive activities planned for the bachelor party, participating in the less costly group events while avoiding the high-end restaurants and exclusive nightclub experiences. Carlos reacted to this suggestion with anger and hurt, insisting that he couldn't be a partial participant in his best friend's celebration without looking cheap and disappointing everyone involved. The emotional manipulation that followed was both familiar and exhausting. Carlos painted himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control, trapped between loyalty to his friend and financial limitations imposed by his family's lack of support. He suggested that my parents' inability to help him would damage his reputation and his friendship with Miguel, consequences that would extend far beyond the bachelor party itself.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My parents absorbed this guilt and responsibility, discussing various options for finding the money Carlos needed without considering that their adult son should be capable of managing his own financial obligations. They talked about taking loans, asking relatives for help, or finding ways to earn extra income quickly, treating Carlos's poor planning as a family emergency rather than a personal learning opportunity. I watched these conversations with growing resentment and disbelief, recognizing the pattern of enabling behavior that had characterized Carlos's entire life. Every poor decision he made became someone else's problem to solve. Every consequence he faced became a family crisis requiring collective action. Meanwhile, my own achievements and milestones were expected to be self-funded and self-managed, as though my competence disqualified me from family support. The weekend before Carlos's Vegas trip,
I decided to spend a few days at my parents' house, helping my mother with some wedding preparation tasks and trying to maintain family connections despite my growing frustration with their priorities. I brought the engagement ring with me, planning to have it cleaned and inspected by a jeweler my father recommended before the wedding photographs were taken. That Friday evening, I carefully removed the ring before showering and placed it in the small jewelry box on my childhood dresser, the same spot where I had kept treasures since elementary school. The box sat next to photos from my graduation and awards from various academic achievements, a collection of memories from a life built on hard work and personal responsibility. The ring looked beautiful against the velvet lining, catching the light from my bedside lamp and reflecting tiny rainbows on the walls. Saturday morning, I woke early and joined my parents for breakfast, discussing final wedding details and enjoying a rare peaceful family meal without crisis or conflict dominating the conversation. My mother seemed more relaxed than she had in weeks, and my father actually asked thoughtful questions about my work projects and future career goals. The atmosphere felt normal and loving, reminiscent of better times in our family history. After breakfast, I returned to my room to retrieve the ring before heading out to run errands with my mother. The jewelry box was exactly where I had left it, undisturbed and familiar on the dresser, but when I opened it, the ring was gone. In its place was a crumpled piece of notebook paper with IOU $18,000 will pay back soon, Carlos written in his messy handwriting. The shock of discovery hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I stared at the note for several seconds, unable to process what I was seeing. The ring that represented my future, my security, and my partner's love had been stolen by my own brother and replaced with a worthless promise from someone who had never repaid a debt in his life. My hands shook as I searched through the jewelry box, hoping desperately that I had somehow missed seeing the ring, or that Carlos had moved it to a different location for safekeeping. But the reality was undeniable. My engagement ring was gone, taken without permission by someone who knew exactly what it meant to me, and how devastating its loss would be. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a combination of betrayal, violation, and absolute fury that made me feel physically ill. This wasn't just theft of an expensive piece of jewelry, it was the destruction of trust, the violation of my most private space, and the ultimate demonstration of how little my feelings and needs mattered to my family. I called out for Carlos, hoping somehow there was an explanation or a misunderstanding that could resolve this nightmare. But his truck was gone from the driveway, and my parents informed me that he had left early that morning for the airport, excited and grateful for the opportunity to join his friend's bachelor party celebration in Las Vegas. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Carlos had known exactly when I would be at the house, exactly where I kept important items, and exactly how to access my room without suspicion. This wasn't an impulsive crime of opportunity, it was a calculated betrayal planned and executed while I slept peacefully in the next room. When I showed my parents the IOU note, their initial reaction was shock and denial. They couldn't believe that Carlos would do something so thoughtless and hurtful, insisting that there must be some mistake or misunderstanding. But as the evidence became undeniable, their response shifted from disbelief to damage control, focusing on how to minimize the situation rather than how to make it right. My father's first concern was practical: how much trouble Carlos could get into legally, and what consequences he might face when he returned from Vegas. My mother worried about family relationships and how this incident would affect future gatherings and celebrations. Neither of them seemed to fully grasp the emotional devastation I was experiencing, or the significance of what had been stolen from me. Their suggestions for resolution were inadequate and insulting. They offered to advance me money to buy a replacement ring, as though the financial value was the only thing that mattered. They promised to make Carlos pay them back when he returned, treating this as a family loan rather than theft. They asked me not to involve the police or insurance companies, fearing that legal action would destroy Carlos's future and reputation. Standing in my childhood bedroom, holding my brother's worthless IOU while my parents minimized the theft of my most precious possession, I realized that nothing had changed since we were children. Carlos's needs and comfort still took priority over my pain and rights. His future still mattered more than my present. His mistakes were still treated as unfortunate accidents rather than deliberate choices with serious consequences. The conversation with my parents revealed the full extent of their enabling behavior and conditional love. They had known about Carlos's financial desperation and his lack of funds for the Vegas trip, but they had apparently discussed no boundaries around how he might solve his problem. The possibility of him stealing from his own family to fund his entertainment had never been addressed because they couldn't imagine their precious son would sink to such depths. Even now, faced with undeniable evidence of Carlos's betrayal, they were more concerned with protecting him from consequences than with supporting me through the violation I had experienced. Their immediate response was to strategize about damage control, rather than to offer comfort, understanding, or justice for their daughter, who had been robbed by her own brother. As I sat on my childhood bed, staring at the empty jewelry box that had once held the symbol of my future, I began to understand that this moment would define not just my relationship with Carlos, but my entire relationship with my family. How they handled this crisis would reveal their true priorities and values, determining whether I could continue to be part of a family system that consistently sacrificed my well-being for Carlos's convenience. The ring David had chosen with such care and love was gone, probably already sold to fund my brother's Vegas adventure. But something else was beginning in its place, a clear-eyed recognition of family dynamics that had shaped my entire life, and a growing determination to respond differently than I ever had before. The first call I made was to David, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what had happened without completely falling apart. He listened in stunned silence as I described, finding the empty jewelry box and Carlos's crude handwritten IOU, the reality of the theft sinking in with each word I spoke. When I finished, there was a long pause before he responded with quiet fury that matched my own devastating sense of betrayal. David's immediate response was practical and supportive. He offered to drive over immediately, suggested we contact the police to file a theft report, and reminded me that the ring was fully insured through his comprehensive policy. His calm approach helped ground me when I felt like my world was spinning out of control, providing the stability I desperately needed, while processing this violation of trust and safety. When David arrived at my parents' house, 30 minutes later, the tension in the living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents sat rigidly on the couch, my mother wringing her hands while my father stared at the floor, both of them clearly struggling with the reality of their son's actions. They had spent the intervening time trying to reach Carlos by phone, but his number went straight to voicemail, probably because he was already airborne on his way to Las Vegas. David's presence shifted the dynamic in the room immediately. Unlike my parents, who were focused on protecting Carlos from consequences, David was concerned solely with supporting me and addressing the crime that had been committed against us. He asked direct questions about when the theft had occurred, whether anyone else had access to my room, and what steps we needed to take to recover the ring or receive compensation through insurance. My parents became increasingly uncomfortable, as David treated the situation like the serious crime it was rather than a family misunderstanding that could be resolved quietly. They kept emphasizing that Carlos would pay back the money, that this was just poor judgment rather than malicious intent, and that involving outside authorities would destroy their family relationships and reputation in the community. The conversation grew heated when my father suggested that we should wait for Carlos to return from Vegas before taking any official action, giving him a chance to explain himself and possibly return the ring before consequences became too severe. David's response was measured but firm, pointing out that the ring had likely been sold immediately to fund the trip, meaning that waiting would only allow more time for evidence to disappear and trails to grow cold. My mother began crying, lamenting how this situation was tearing the family apart, and wondering where she had gone wrong in raising her children. Her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine, designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing justice rather than expressing real remorse for what Carlos had done to me. The focus remained on her pain and Carlos's future rather than the violation I had experienced. Standing in that living room, watching my parents prioritize my brother's comfort over my rights, I made a decision that would change everything. I told them that I was filing a police report immediately, whether they supported me or not, and that I would be pursuing all available legal remedies to recover my property. If they chose to view this as betrayal, rather than justice, that revealed everything I needed to know about their values and priorities. The drive to the police station was quiet, with David holding my hand while I stared out the window at familiar Phoenix streets that suddenly felt foreign and unwelcoming. Filing the report was surreal, transforming my brother from family member to criminal suspect with each form I completed, and every statement I provided to the investigating officer. Detective Sarah Thompson was professional and compassionate, explaining the process of investigating jewelry theft and the likelihood of recovery given the circumstances. She noted that family theft cases were particularly challenging because victims often faced pressure to drop charges or accept inadequate restitution, but she emphasized that the law treated theft the same, regardless of family relationships. The insurance claim process began immediately, with David contacting his agent to report the theft and begin the documentation required for compensation. The agent was thorough and helpful, requesting copies of the police report, the original appraisal, and detailed photographs of the ring that David had wisely taken when he first purchased the piece. The comprehensive coverage meant we would eventually receive full replacement value, but the process would take several weeks to complete. That evening, alone in David's apartment, I finally allowed myself to fully process what had happened. The ring was gone, stolen by someone I had loved and trusted my entire life, someone who knew exactly what it meant to me, and chose to take it anyway. The physical loss was devastating, but the emotional betrayal cut even deeper, destroying my faith in family bonds and unconditional love. David held me as I cried, not trying to fix the situation or minimize my pain, simply providing the comfort and support I desperately needed. He didn't suggest that I should forgive Carlos quickly or maintain family harmony at the expense of justice. Instead, he validated my feelings and reinforced that what had happened to me was wrong, regardless of family relationships or financial pressures. Sunday morning brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls from my parents as they processed the reality that I had actually filed criminal charges against Carlos. My mother alternated between tears and anger, begging me to reconsider and warning that this decision would destroy our family permanently.
My father took a different approach, attempting to negotiate a resolution that would avoid legal consequences for Carlos while still addressing my concerns. Their phone calls revealed the depth of their denial about Carlos's behavior and character. They continued to frame his actions as poor judgment rather than deliberate theft, suggesting that family loyalty should override legal considerations. When I pointed out that Carlos had shown no loyalty to me when he violated my privacy and stole my most precious possession, they became defensive and accusatory. The most painful call came from my mother that evening, when she played the family guilt card with devastating effectiveness. She told me that my decision to press charges was hurting my father's health, that the stress was affecting his blood pressure and sleep, and that I needed to consider the consequences of my actions on people who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities in life. This emotional manipulation was familiar territory, the same tactics that had been used throughout my childhood to make me responsible for everyone else's feelings and decisions. But this time, instead of capitulating to maintain peace, I felt a cold clarity about what was really happening. My parents were asking me to sacrifice my rights and dignity to protect Carlos from the consequences of his own criminal behavior. My response was calm but definitive. I told my mother that I was sorry she was upset, but that Carlos had created this situation through his choices, not me through mine. I explained that pressing charges was the right thing to do, both legally and morally, and that I would not be manipulated into abandoning my pursuit of justice to maintain a false sense of family harmony. The conversation ended with my mother hanging up on me, but not before she delivered a final blow designed to make me reconsider my position. She told me that if I continued with the charges, I would no longer be welcome at family gatherings, that my actions had shown I cared more about material possessions than family relationships, and that I was destroying the family my parents had worked so hard to build. Her words stung, but they also crystallized something important for me. A family that required me to accept theft and betrayal to maintain membership was not a family worth belonging to. The choice wasn't between the ring and family harmony, it was between self-respect and continued enabling of destructive behavior. Monday brought news from Detective Thompson that Carlos had been contacted by Las Vegas police, who had served him with paperwork related to the theft charges while he was still celebrating at his friend's bachelor party. The detective explained that Carlos would need to return to Phoenix to address the charges, either through surrender or extradition,
and that the investigation was proceeding regardless of his location or cooperation. The thought of Carlos receiving legal documents while surrounded by his friends at a celebration he had funded with my stolen ring filled me with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the cost was the destruction of family relationships that had shaped my entire life. Even knowing I was doing the right thing, the emotional toll was enormous. David suggested we spend a few days away from Phoenix, giving me space to process what was happening without constant phone calls and pressure from my family. We drove to Sedona, staying at the same hotel where he had proposed months earlier, walking the same trails where we had planned our future together. The familiar setting provided comfort while I worked through the grief of losing not just my ring, but my faith and family bonds. During our time in Sedona, my phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from extended family members who had heard various versions of the story from my parents. Most of the messages were variations on the same theme: family should come before legal action. Carlos was young and made a mistake, and I was overreacting to a situation that could be resolved privately. A few relatives took a different approach, supporting my decision to press charges and sharing their own stories of Carlos's problematic behavior over the years. My cousin Elena revealed that Carlos had borrowed money from her repeatedly without repaying it, always with promises that this time would be different. My uncle Miguel mentioned tools that had gone missing from his garage when Carlos had helped with a project, items that were never returned or replaced. These conversations painted a picture of systematic irresponsible behavior that my parents had either ignored or enabled, treating each incident as an isolated mistake, rather than part of a pattern. Carlos had been taking advantage of family relationships for years, confident that blood ties would protect him from real consequences for his actions. Wednesday evening, while David and I were having dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Red Rocks, Detective Thompson called with an update on the case. Carlos had hired an attorney and was negotiating his surrender, but he was also claiming that taking the ring had been a misunderstanding, that he had intended to ask permission but ran out of time before his flight. The detective's tone made it clear that she didn't find Carlos's explanation credible, particularly given the evidence of premeditation involved in accessing my room, locating the specific valuable item, and leaving a note that acknowledged the theft. She explained that the prosecutor's office was prepared to pursue felony charges given the value of the stolen property, regardless of family relationships or claims of misunderstanding. That same evening, I received a call from Carlos himself, speaking in hushed tones from what sounded like a hotel room in Las Vegas. His voice was shaken and desperate, nothing like the confident young man who had taken my ring without permission just days earlier. He claimed he had made a terrible mistake, that he had panicked about the bachelor party expenses and made a poor decision without thinking it through completely. Carlos begged me to drop the charges, promising he would find a way to repay the money and make everything right when he returned to Phoenix. He painted himself as a victim of circumstances, overwhelmed by financial pressure and loyal friendship obligations that had clouded his judgment. The familiar pattern of taking no real responsibility while asking for forgiveness was exactly what I had expected. My response surprised even me with its calm clarity. I told Carlos that his choices had consequences, that stealing my engagement ring had been a deliberate violation of trust that couldn't be undone with apologies or promises. I explained that the legal process would move forward regardless of his regrets, and that he would need to work with his attorney to address the charges he was facing. When Carlos realized that I wasn't going to be swayed by his pleas, his tone shifted from desperate to angry. He accused me of being vindictive and heartless, choosing legal revenge over family loyalty. He suggested that my decision to press charges revealed my true character, that I valued money more than relationships and was willing to destroy his future over a piece of jewelry that could be replaced. The irony of his accusations wasn't lost on me. Carlos was claiming I valued material possessions over relationships while defending his decision to steal my most precious possession to fund his entertainment. He was calling me vindictive while asking me to accept his betrayal without consequences. His words revealed the depth of his entitlement and his complete inability to understand the gravity of what he had done. I ended the call by telling Carlos that he was right about one thing: his actions had revealed true character but not mine. His willingness to violate my privacy, steal my property and betray my trust, to solve his own problems, showed exactly who he was and what I meant to him. The legal consequences he was facing were not my revenge, but the natural result of his criminal behavior. Thursday morning brought a call from my father, who had apparently been designated as the family's final negotiator in their campaign to make me drop the charges. His approach was different from my mother's emotional manipulation or Carlos's desperate pleading. Instead, he appealed to my sense of practical consequences and long-term family relationships. My father explained that Carlos was facing serious felony charges that could result in prison time and permanent damage to his employment prospects and future opportunities. He acknowledged that what Carlos had done was wrong, but suggested that the punishment I was pursuing was disproportionate to the crime, particularly given that the insurance would eventually replace the ring. When I pointed out that the insurance replacement didn't address the violation of trust or the emotional trauma of the theft, my father dismissed these concerns as temporary feelings that would fade with time. He seemed genuinely unable to understand that the ring's value went far beyond its monetary worth, that Carlos's betrayal had damaged something that couldn't be repaired with money or apologies. The conversation revealed the fundamental difference between my father's values and my own. He viewed the theft as a financial transaction that could be resolved through restitution, while I understood it as a violation of relationship and trust that required accountability and consequences. His concern for Carlos's future showed no corresponding concern for my emotional well-being or sense of security. My father's final argument was an ultimatum disguised as a plea. He told me that continuing with the charges would force him and my mother to choose between their children, a choice that would tear the family apart permanently. He suggested that my decision to pursue legal action was selfish, putting my personal grievances ahead of family unity and everyone else's happiness. Standing in our Sedona hotel room looking out at the landscape where David had proposed and we had planned our future together, I felt a profound sense of clarity about what this conversation really represented. My father wasn't asking me to forgive Carlos or work toward reconciliation. He was asking me to pretend that the theft had never happened, to sacrifice my dignity and self-respect to maintain a family system that had never truly valued me. My response was quiet but absolute. I told my father that Carlos had already made his choice when he decided to steal from me, that the family unity he was concerned about had been destroyed by theft and betrayal, rather than by my pursuit of justice. I explained that I would not sacrifice my integrity to preserve relationships built on inequality and conditional love. The call ended with my father's disappointed silence, followed by his formal declaration that I was no longer welcome at family events or gatherings until I came to my senses and dropped the charges against Carlos. His words carried the weight of finality, severing connections that had defined my identity for 25 years. After hanging up, I sat quietly with David, processing the reality that I was now essentially orphaned by choice, cut off from my family of origin because I had refused to accept criminal behavior without consequences. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was a growing sense of liberation from toxic dynamics that had shaped my entire life. Friday brought news that Carlos had returned to Phoenix and surrendered to authorities, accompanied by his attorney and my parents who had hired the lawyer and were funding his defense. Detective Thompson explained that he had been released on bail, with conditions that included no contact with me and surrender of his passport to prevent him from fleeing the jurisdiction. The insurance adjuster contacted David to schedule the final inspection and documentation required to process our claim, explaining that the comprehensive coverage meant we would receive full replacement value for the ring within 2 weeks. While this provided financial resolution, the emotional impact of the theft would take much longer to heal. That evening, David and I had a serious conversation about how these events had affected our relationship and our wedding plans. He had watched me navigate family betrayal and legal proceedings with strength I hadn't known I possessed, but he was concerned about the emotional toll and the impact on our future happiness together. David's support throughout the crisis had been unwavering, never suggesting that I should drop charges to maintain family harmony or accept less than full justice for what had been done to me. His reaction to my family's behavior had been one of protective anger rather than diplomatic neutrality, showing me what it felt like to have someone truly in my corner without conditions or reservations. We decided to postpone the wedding for 6 months, giving me time to heal from the family trauma and establish new traditions that weren't connected to my parents' expectations and demands. This decision felt liberating rather than disappointing, offering us the chance to plan a celebration focused entirely on our love and commitment rather than family politics and obligations. Saturday morning, I received an unexpected visitor at David's apartment. My maternal grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had driven from Tucson to see me, having heard about the family crisis through the extended family network. At 83 years old, she had witnessed decades of family drama and had her own perspective on Carlos's behavior and my parents' response to it. Abuela Rosa's visit was a gift I hadn't expected, providing wisdom and validation from someone who had known our family dynamics longer than anyone else. She told me that she had watched Carlos grow up without real boundaries or consequences, enabled by parents who confused love with indulgence and protection with enabling destructive behavior. Her perspective on my decision to press charges was clear and supportive. She believed that accountability was an act of love, that allowing Carlos to continue his pattern of irresponsible behavior without consequences would ultimately destroy him as well as everyone around him. She reminded me that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction. Abuela Rosa shared stories about her own difficult decisions regarding family members who had chosen destructive paths, explaining how she had learned to separate love from enabling, support from sacrifice of her own well-being. Her words provided a framework for understanding that family loyalty didn't require accepting unacceptable behavior or sacrificing personal integrity for group harmony. Before she left, my grandmother gave me her own engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to her mother before her. She explained that it represented generations of women who had faced difficult choices and chosen their own dignity over family pressure, a legacy of strength that she wanted me to carry forward. Sunday evening, as David and I prepared to return to Phoenix and resume our normal routines, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 1 week. The theft of my engagement ring had revealed truths about my family that had been hidden beneath years of dysfunction and enabling, forcing me to choose between self-respect and continued participation in toxic relationships. The choice had been painful but necessary, establishing boundaries that protected my emotional well-being while holding Carlos accountable for his criminal behavior. The legal process would continue, but the personal transformation was already complete. I had discovered that I was strong enough to stand alone when necessary, that my worth wasn't determined by family acceptance, and that love without respect was not love at all. As we drove back into Phoenix that evening, I realized that losing my engagement ring had cost me far more than $18,000. It had cost me my illusions about family, my naive faith in unconditional love, and my willingness to sacrifice myself for others' comfort. But it had also given me something invaluable, the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, stand up for myself, and build a life based on authentic relationships rather than obligatory connections. 3 weeks after returning to Phoenix, the insurance check arrived in the mail, providing full compensation for the stolen engagement ring along with additional coverage for the emotional distress and inconvenience caused by the theft. David and I deposited the check together, both of us recognizing that while money could replace the financial loss, it couldn't restore the innocence and trust that had been shattered by my brother's betrayal. The legal proceedings moved forward steadily, with Carlos pleading not guilty despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt. His attorney had apparently advised him that family theft cases were often dismissed or reduced due to pressure on victims to drop charges, a strategy that might have worked if they had understood my resolve. Instead of weakening over time, my determination to see justice served had only grown stronger. My new routine excluded my parents completely, a reality that was both liberating and occasionally lonely. Sunday dinners were replaced by quiet evenings with David, family gatherings became outings with our chosen friends, and the constant drama of Carlos's latest crisis was replaced by peaceful conversations about our actual goals and interests. The absence of toxic family dynamics allowed me to rediscover parts of my personality that had been suppressed for years. David and I began house hunting, looking for a home that would represent our future together without any connection to my complicated family history. We found a beautiful property in Chandler, far enough from my parents' neighborhood to feel completely separate but close enough to David's job to be practical. The house had a modern kitchen where I could experiment with cooking, a home office where David could work on his technology projects, and a garden where we could build something beautiful together. The preliminary hearing for Carlos's case was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in May, requiring me to testify about the theft and its impact on my life. Walking into the courthouse, I felt nervous but resolute, knowing that this was my opportunity to ensure that actions had consequences and that family relationships couldn't be used as shields against accountability. Carlos looked different sitting at the defendant's table, smaller somehow than the confident young man who had always dominated family conversations. His attorney whispered frantically in his ear while he avoided making eye contact with me, the reality of his situation finally seeming to penetrate his usual sense of invulnerability. My parents sat in the gallery behind him, my mother clutching a tissue while my father stared straight ahead with rigid determination. My testimony was straightforward and factual, describing the discovery of the theft, the value of the stolen property, and the impact on my sense of security and family relationships. The prosecutor was thorough but respectful, allowing me to explain not just what had happened but how it had affected my ability to trust others and feel safe in my own family's presence. During cross-examination, Carlos's attorney attempted to minimize the significance of the theft by emphasizing family relationships and suggesting that the incident had been blown out of proportion. He implied that my decision to press charges rather than handle the matter privately showed vindictiveness and lack of forgiveness, tactics clearly designed to make me appear unreasonable and vengeful. My response was calm and clear, explaining that family relationships didn't exempt anyone from the law, and that forgiveness didn't require abandoning consequences for criminal behavior. I testified that Carlos had shown no remorse beyond regret at being caught, no understanding of how his actions had affected others, and no genuine commitment to change his pattern of irresponsible behavior. The hearing concluded with the judge finding probable cause to proceed to trial, rejecting the defense attorney's motion to dismiss based on family circumstances. Carlos would face the full consequences of his choices, regardless of his relationship to the victim or his parents' wealth and influence in the community. Outside the courthouse, my parents made one final attempt to convince me to reconsider my position. My mother approached with tears in her eyes, begging me to find it in my heart to forgive Carlos and drop the charges before his future was permanently damaged by a felony conviction. She painted a picture of a young man whose life would be ruined by one mistake, whose career prospects and relationship opportunities would be destroyed by my refusal to show mercy. My father took a different approach, appealing to my practical nature by pointing out that Carlos had learned his lesson and would never repeat this kind of behavior. He suggested that continuing with the prosecution served no purpose beyond satisfying my desire for revenge, that real justice would involve restitution and forgiveness rather than criminal penalties and permanent consequences. Standing on the courthouse steps, facing parents who still couldn't understand that their enabling had created the very situation they were trying to resolve, I felt a profound sadness for what we had all lost. But I also felt clarity about what needed to happen next. I told them that Carlos had made his choices, knowing the potential consequences, that my job wasn't to protect him from those consequences, but to ensure that crime didn't pay simply because it happened within a family. The conversation ended when my father declared that I was no longer his daughter if I continued with this prosecution, that my actions had shown I valued vengeance more than family loyalty. His words were designed to wound, to make me choose between justice and acceptance, but they had the opposite effect. Instead of feeling rejected, I felt released from the burden of earning love from people who had never truly offered it unconditionally. 6 weeks later, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a jury trial, Carlos finally accepted a plea agreement that included felony conviction, restitution, community service, and probation. His attorney had apparently explained that sympathy for family theft was limited when the victim was willing to testify and the evidence was clear, making a trial a losing proposition that would result in harsher penalties. The restitution amount included not just the value of the ring but additional compensation for legal expenses and emotional distress, totaling nearly $25,000 that Carlos would be required to pay over the course of his probation. The community service requirement involved working with nonprofit organizations that helped crime victims, giving him direct exposure to the impact of theft and betrayal on people's lives. I attended the sentencing hearing to provide a victim impact statement, my final opportunity to address Carlos directly about how his actions had affected me. Looking at my brother across the courtroom, I felt neither anger nor satisfaction, just a profound sadness for the relationship that had been destroyed by his choices and our parents' inability to hold him accountable. My statement focused on the betrayal of trust rather than the financial loss, explaining how Carlos's theft had damaged not just my sense of security but my ability to believe in family bonds and unconditional love. I described the pain of discovering that someone I had loved and supported throughout his life valued his entertainment more than my well-being, that family meant so little to him that he could violate my privacy and steal my most precious possession without apparent remorse. Carlos was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, and for the first time since the theft, he seemed to genuinely understand the gravity of his actions. His statement was brief and appeared sincere, acknowledging that he had betrayed his sister's trust and damaged family relationships in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. He accepted responsibility for his choices without making excuses or blaming circumstances beyond his control. The judge's final comments emphasized that family relationships created greater rather than lesser obligations to treat each other with respect and honesty. She noted that Carlos had violated the most fundamental trust by stealing from someone who loved him, demonstrating a level of selfishness and disregard that deserved serious consequences, regardless of his age or family circumstances. After the hearing, David and I went home to our new house in Chandler, finally able to close this chapter of our lives and focus completely on building our future together. The legal process was complete, justice had been served, and I had learned that standing up for myself didn't require anyone else's permission or approval. Our wedding took place 6 months later in our own backyard, surrounded by friends who had become our chosen family and a few relatives who had supported our decision to hold Carlos accountable for his actions. Abuela Rosa walked me down the aisle, her presence representing continuity with family members who understood that love required respect rather than enabling destructive behavior. The ceremony was small and intimate, focused entirely on our commitment to each other rather than external expectations or family politics. David's parents welcomed me warmly into their family, treating me as a daughter rather than an in-law, and providing the unconditional acceptance I had never experienced from my own parents. Their support helped heal wounds I hadn't fully recognized were still bleeding. My new engagement ring was different from the original, chosen together rather than as a surprise, representing our partnership and shared decision-making rather than traditional romantic gestures. It was beautiful and meaningful in its own way, but more importantly, it symbolized a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than duty and obligation. Carlos completed his community service and paid his restitution over the following 2 years, occasionally sending updates through mutual relatives about his progress and apparent personal growth. He had started attending counseling to address his impulsive behavior and financial irresponsibility, changes that seemed genuine rather than performative. While I appreciated his efforts to improve himself, I maintained clear boundaries about contact and involvement in his life. My parents continued to hope for reconciliation, sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts that I acknowledged politely but briefly. They struggled to understand that forgiveness didn't require forgetting or returning to previous relationship patterns, that healing sometimes meant maintaining distance from people who had caused harm. Their inability to respect my boundaries only confirmed the wisdom of my decision to limit contact. 3 years after the theft, I received a letter from Carlos that was different from his previous attempts at communication. Instead of asking for forgiveness or trying to minimize what he had done, he simply acknowledged the full impact of his actions and expressed genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't suggest that we should rebuild our relationship, just took complete responsibility for his choices and their consequences. The letter represented real growth and accountability in ways that his earlier apologies had not, showing that consequences had ultimately helped him understand the seriousness of his behavior. While I appreciated his maturation, I wasn't ready to risk the peace and stability I had built by reopening old wounds or testing whether his changes were permanent. David and I built a beautiful life together, founded on trust, respect, and genuine partnership rather than obligation or tradition. We traveled to places I had never imagined seeing, tried new experiences without worrying about family approval, and created traditions that reflected our values rather than inherited expectations.
The freedom from toxic family dynamics allowed both of us to grow in ways that wouldn't have been possible within those constrained relationships. 5 years later, we had two beautiful children who would grow up understanding that love meant treating each other with kindness and respect, that family meant making room for everyone at the table, and that actions always have consequences regardless of relationships or circumstances. They would know their extended family but wouldn't be required to accept unacceptable behavior to maintain those connections. Looking back on that devastating Christmas morning when I discovered my engagement ring was gone, I can see now that Carlos's theft gave me something invaluable: the courage to choose my own well-being over others' expectations, the strength to stand alone when necessary, and the wisdom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than blood obligation. Sometimes the most painful experiences become the catalysts for the most important transformations. The insurance claim that started as compensation for a stolen ring became the foundation for a completely new life, one where I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide for others. Family, I learned, was not who you were born to, but who chose to love you completely, who made space for you at their table, and who supported your growth rather than demanding your sacrifice. What would you do if faced with betrayal from someone you loved? How do you balance family loyalty with personal integrity? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember that you deserve relationships that honor your worth rather than diminish it. 10 years have passed since that morning when I discovered my engagement ring missing from my childhood jewelry box, and the ripple effects of that single act of betrayal continue to shape my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The woman who once desperately sought approval from parents who withheld it has been replaced by someone who understands that self-worth cannot be granted or taken away by others, no matter how closely related they might be. David and I recently celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary at the same Sedona restaurant where we had processed the initial shock and pain of the theft. Sitting across from my husband, watching him interact with our 7-year-old daughter Emma and 5-year-old son Michael, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the path that had led us here. The children were building elaborate stories with their food, completely unconscious of the complex family dynamics that had shaped their parents' early relationship. Emma has David's analytical mind and my determination, showing early signs of the kind of strong character that won't be easily manipulated or convinced to accept unacceptable treatment. Michael inherited my curiosity about how things work and David's patient approach to problem solving, already demonstrating the emotional intelligence that will serve him well in navigating relationships throughout his life. Neither child has ever met my parents or Carlos, a reality that sometimes saddens me but never makes me question the boundaries I established. The accounting firm where I work has grown significantly over the past decade, and I now manage a team of 12 professionals while specializing in forensic accounting for fraud investigations. The skills I developed in documenting and analyzing financial crimes have made me particularly effective at helping businesses recover from theft and embezzlement, work that feels meaningful given my personal experience with betrayal and violation of trust. My professional success has been built on the same principles that guided my response to Carlos's theft: thorough documentation, clear boundaries, and refusing to enable destructive behavior even when it creates uncomfortable consequences. Clients often comment on my ability to remain objective while still showing compassion for victims, a balance that comes from understanding both the practical and emotional impacts of financial crimes. David's cybersecurity company has expanded internationally, with offices in 3 countries and contracts with major corporations concerned about digital theft and data protection. His work involves anticipating and preventing the kind of calculated violations that we experienced on a personal level, protecting other people's valuable assets from those who would take them without permission or consequences. The house in Chandler has become the center of a chosen family that includes David's parents, my grandmother Rosa, who moved closer to us 2 years ago, and a circle of friends whose relationships are based on mutual respect rather than blood obligation. Our holiday gatherings are loud and joyful, with everyone contributing dishes that represent their heritage and traditions, creating new customs that honor the past while building something entirely our own. Emma and Michael know they have biological grandparents and an uncle they have never met, but they don't feel deprived or curious about these absent relationships.
Their lives are full of people who love them unconditionally, who celebrate their achievements without comparison to other children, and who provide the kind of stable support that allows children to develop confidence and empathy naturally. Last Christmas, exactly 10 years after the theft that changed everything, we hosted 15 people in our home for a celebration that lasted from morning until late evening. David's parents flew in from California, Rosa brought her famous tamales, and our friends contributed everything from traditional Chinese dumplings to Ethiopian injera bread. The dining room table, extended with 2 card tables to accommodate everyone, was a testament to the family we had created through choice rather than accident of birth. During dinner, Emma asked why we didn't invite more relatives like other families did, a question that prompted me to explain that families come in many different forms and that the most important thing was being surrounded by people who treated each other with kindness and respect. She nodded seriously, then announced that she was glad our family was exactly the right size for everyone to have enough attention and love. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected phone call from a victim's advocate who had been contacted by Carlos's probation officer. Carlos had completed all the requirements of his sentence, including full restitution payment and community service, and had specifically requested the opportunity to participate in a victim offender dialogue program if I was interested. The advocate explained that such programs sometimes helped both parties find closure, but emphasized that participation was entirely voluntary and should only be considered if it served my emotional well-being. The request surprised me because Carlos had honored the no-contact provisions of his probation completely, never attempting to reach out directly or through family members during the intervening years. His participation in counseling and community service had apparently been genuine rather than performative, leading to what his supervisors described as significant personal growth and behavioral change. After discussing the option with David and spending several weeks considering whether such a meeting would be helpful or harmful, I decided to participate in one carefully structured conversation with specific boundaries and professional facilitation. The meeting took place at the Victim Services Office with a trained mediator present, ensuring that the interaction remained focused on accountability and healing rather than reconciliation or relationship repair. Carlos looked different than I remembered, older and more serious, carrying himself with a gravity that hadn't been present during his younger years. He had completed a degree in social work and was employed by a nonprofit organization that helped young people develop financial literacy and life skills, work that seemed to reflect genuine commitment to addressing the problems that had led to his destructive behavior. His words during our 90-minute conversation were carefully chosen and clearly sincere, acknowledging the full impact of his actions without minimizing the damage or making excuses for his choices. He understood that the theft had been a violation of trust that went far beyond the monetary value of the ring, that his betrayal had damaged not just our relationship but my sense of safety and security within our entire family system. Most importantly, Carlos demonstrated understanding that accountability meant accepting consequences without expecting forgiveness or relationship repair in return. He expressed gratitude for the legal system's intervention, explaining that facing real consequences had forced him to confront behavioral patterns that were destroying his relationships and limiting his potential for genuine happiness and success. When the mediator asked if there was anything I wanted Carlos to understand about how his actions had affected me, I explained that the theft had ultimately become a catalyst for positive change in my life, forcing me to recognize and address toxic family dynamics that had been limiting my growth for years. While I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, the pain of betrayal had led to the strength and wisdom that now characterized my relationships and choices. Carlos's response revealed the depth of his personal transformation over the intervening decade. He acknowledged that his entitled behavior had been enabled by parents who confused love with protection from consequences, creating a dynamic that harmed everyone involved, including himself. He had learned through counseling and community service that real love sometimes required allowing people to experience the full weight of their choices, even when those consequences were painful. The conversation concluded with both of us expressing hope that our respective journeys toward healing would continue, but without any expectation or pressure for ongoing contact or relationship rebuilding. We had each found peace through different paths, and that peace didn't require forgiveness or forgetting, just acceptance of what had happened and commitment to healthier choices moving forward. Driving home from that meeting, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing for years, not because Carlos and I had reconciled, but because I had seen clear evidence that consequences could indeed lead to growth and change when they were consistently applied and genuinely accepted. The legal system's intervention had served its intended purpose, protecting society while creating opportunities for accountability and rehabilitation. My parents have never acknowledged the role their enabling played in Carlos's destructive behavior or apologized for choosing his comfort over my well-being during the crisis that destroyed our family relationships. They continue to send birthday cards and Christmas gifts that I acknowledge politely but briefly, maintaining cordial distance without hostility or ongoing conflict. Recent communications through extended family members suggest that my parents have begun to recognize the connection between their parenting choices and Carlos's struggles, but they remain unable to take direct responsibility for the damage their favoritism and enabling caused to both of their children. Carlos's transformation has apparently helped them understand that accountability rather than protection might have served him better throughout his youth. The conversation with Carlos reinforced lessons I had learned through therapy and personal reflection over the years, that people can change when they face real consequences for their behavior. That family love sometimes requires difficult boundaries rather than unconditional acceptance, and that healing doesn't always require forgiveness or relationship restoration. Emma and Michael are growing up with an understanding that their actions have consequences, that family relationships require mutual respect and consideration, and that love means treating others with kindness even when it's difficult or inconvenient. They see adults in their lives modeling healthy conflict resolution, accountability, and genuine care for each other's well-being, without manipulation or conditional affection. The insurance money from the stolen ring became the down payment on our first house, launching a decade of financial stability and growth that might not have been possible otherwise. The replacement ring David chose with my input has become even more meaningful than the original, representing partnership and shared decision-making rather than surprise and traditional romance. Our marriage has been tested by external pressures and internal challenges over the years, but it has never been threatened by the kind of toxic family dynamics that characterized my childhood. We have built our relationship on foundations of honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's happiness and success, creating a partnership that supports individual growth while strengthening our bond. The forensic accounting work that grew out of my experience with theft has become both personally fulfilling and financially rewarding, allowing me to help other victims of financial crimes while building expertise that commands respect in my professional community. Each case I work reinforces the importance of thorough documentation, clear boundaries, and refusing to enable destructive behavior through misguided compassion. David's cybersecurity business has thrived partly because his personal experience with violation of trust makes him particularly effective at anticipating and preventing the kinds of breaches that devastate individuals and organizations. Our shared understanding of how betrayal affects victims has shaped both of our professional approaches, making us more effective advocates for protection and accountability. The extended family we have created through choice rather than obligation continues to grow and evolve, incorporating new friends and their children, while maintaining the core values of mutual respect, genuine care, and unconditional acceptance. Holiday celebrations, birthday parties, and ordinary weekend gatherings are characterized by joy and inclusion, rather than tension and competition. Rosa, now 85 and living in a small apartment 5 minutes from our house, has become the children's primary connection to their Hispanic heritage while also serving as a bridge to healthier family dynamics than those I experienced growing up. Her wisdom about relationships and boundaries has helped all of us navigate challenges with greater clarity and confidence. Looking back on the decade since Carlos stole my engagement ring, I can see how that single act of betrayal became the catalyst for a complete transformation in how I understood family, love, and personal worth. The pain of discovering that someone I loved would violate my trust for his own convenience forced me to examine every relationship in my life with new clarity and different standards. The legal process that followed taught me that accountability was not revenge but rather a necessary component of healthy relationships and social systems. Watching Carlos face real consequences for his choices and eventually grow from those consequences confirmed that enabling destructive behavior helps no one while clear boundaries serve everyone's long-term interests. The family estrangement that resulted from my refusal to drop charges created space for building relationships based on mutual respect rather than blood obligation, leading to connections that nourish and support rather than drain and diminish. The chosen family that surrounds us now represents everything I wished for but never experienced in my family of origin. Most importantly, the experience taught me that self-worth cannot be granted or revoked by others, that healthy love requires respect as well as affection, and that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is refuse to participate in patterns that harm everyone involved. These lessons have shaped not just my personal relationships but my approach to parenting, work, and community involvement. Emma and Michael are growing up with security I never experienced as a child, confidence that their worth is inherent rather than conditional, and understanding that love means treating others with consideration and kindness. They will enter adulthood with tools for recognizing and addressing unhealthy relationship dynamics, boundaries that protect their well-being, and the courage to choose their own path even when others disapprove. The story that began with theft and betrayal became one of growth, healing, and transformation, proving that even devastating experiences can become sources of strength and wisdom when we respond with courage and integrity, rather than fear and accommodation. Sometimes the most painful losses lead to the most valuable discoveries about who we are and what we deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.